Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a gaming news wrap-up video where we discuss the happenings of the week. This week's topics include the Path of Exile community more enraged than ever, new terror zones coming to Diablo 2 Resurrected, new evidence lending credibility to the Diablo 4 pre-purchase date leak, and more. As always, discussion timestamps can be found in the description below, but right before you skip ahead, just a quick reminder to ring that sub notification bell to be alerted to new Saturday episodes and stay up to date with gaming news highlights. Now before I move on, just a quick word from this video's sponsor, Bloodline Heroes of Lithos, in which new legends will be born. Bloodline Heroes of Lithos is a strategic card-based RPG where you can not only collect champions and build kingdoms, but also create half-blood heirs of your houses by merging the powers of various bloodlines such as orcs, elves, lycans, and demons. Bloodline Heroes of Lithos is a mobile game with simple controls and realistic fantasy graphics with a unique twist on gacha gameplay, something they call the heir system. Basically, you collect champions while you're building up your kingdom and its economy, and then you can marry your champions to create offspring to create heirs for your kingdom. And so you want to marry champions to create more powerful offspring, and champions come from different bloodlines, and you can mix different bloodlines to empower your house in different ways. Oh, and you can freely swap the gender of your companions. Just as a login bonus, you can get a 4-star Quran and a card companion for free. And you can also get for free an heir of Dragonborn and Demigods, which is one of the strongest mixed bloodlines. Bloodlines Heroes of Lithos is available for free on both Android and iOS, so again, download the game with my link in the description or scan the QR code you see on screen. And use the code you see on screen to get 100 diamonds, 100,000 gold, and 20 intimacy packs. So getting into the news, this week was Gamescom, and so with it came the usual slew of game announcements, trailers, all that kind of stuff. One such trailer was a combat trailer for upcoming game Atomic Heart, which continues to look bizarrely amazing. The game is a closed-world action role-playing game set in a sci-fi alternate reality 1955 Soviet Union. It feels very much in line with System Shock or BioShock, so here's hoping that this one will be good. We also got this week an announcement trailer for Dune Awakening, and man is it an awesome trailer. It'll be an open-world survival MMO set on Arrakis, and you can sign up to the beta now. I know seeing MMO survival game raises some flags. We've been burned on such games in the past, but I'm staying hopeful for this one. We also got a gameplay trailer for Lies of P, which seems to be a gritty steampunk action Souls-like game inspired by the story of Pinocchio. While I do think the dark reimagining of a children's story is a played-out trope, this actually looks pretty sweet. Destiny 2 dropped this week its reveal trailer for the upcoming Lightfall expansion, slated to release on February 28th of next year. The expansion will feature a new location, a cyberpunk city on Neptune, a new darkness subclass, and all classes getting access to grappling hooks. We also got a reveal trailer for Dead Island 2, which, according to previews, seems to basically just be a better version of Dead Island 1. And what more can you hope for in a sequel, really? The game clearly doesn't take itself too seriously, it's just a fun, zombie-killing thrill ride. This week also saw the world premiere of some gameplay footage from Black Myth Wukong, a Souls-like action role-playing game based on the 16th century Chinese novel, Journey to the West. And the gameplay looks quite promising. On top of that, they also released 6 minutes of in-game cutscenes that demonstrate terrific cinematography. This game is positioning itself to be 2023's Elden Ring, if it can deliver. In other news, the new Saints Row game has released this week, and it's not doing great. It's sitting at about a 65 out of 100 on Metacritic, and on release it suffered from a bunch of bugs and technical issues. In fact, the reception has been so bad that the stock price for Embracer Group, who owns the developers, dropped about 10% since the game's launch. While Embracer owns a ton of game devs, Saints Row was one of their bigger releases expected to bring in revenue this year, and yeah, tough. In some Knights of the Old Republic news, we spoke recently about how the remake was in some trouble. The project, which was entrusted to Embracer Group subsidiary studio Asper Media, had been put on an indefinite hiatus after both the design director and the art director were fired. Now, as per a Bloomberg report, it's been confirmed that it has been passed on to a different Embracer subsidiary studio, Saber Interactive. Last week, Embracer publicly stated that one of its big titles, known within the industry as a AAA game, had switched developers in order to, quote, ensure the quality bar is where we need it to be for the title. They didn't identify the game, but Bloomberg sources confirmed that it is the KOTOR remake. No real surprises there. And while Embracer said they don't expect any delays because of the change, Bloomberg sources say they expect a 2-year delay. Honestly, better this gets delayed, or heck, even lost in development hell, than release as a remake that does not honor the original classic. In some big Path of Exile news, it seems initial reactions to this league have actually been quite negative. But not because of the league mechanic itself, rather because of what can be summed up as a massive global loot nerf that came as a big shock to players. The situation was so bad that multiple big streamers and content creators within the community expressed that they were quitting the league, including some of the top players in the game. Now, if you're not terribly familiar with Path of Exile, you may think, oh, boo-hoo, spoiled babies don't get tons of loot anymore, cry more. Well, the trouble is that it's not quite as simple as saying, for instance, that unique items are dropping 40 times less. Path of Exile itemization is this immensely intricate system with dozens of interacting subsystems. Crafting, for instance, is a very important part of the game. It's a semi-deterministic way of allowing players to get certain gear that they need without needing to rely on lucky drops. And so messing with item drop rates impacts availability of crafting materials, since some crafting materials are derived from breaking down certain item drops. To just use one example, basically instead of just relying on luck, players have been accustomed to being able to invest crafting resources into getting gear that they need. And now they're not getting nearly as many crafting resources, so they're at the mercy of random drops. It's taking a step away from determinism in a game in which players generally desire to push towards more determinism and less reliance on luck. To clarify, it's not about wanting to get everything as soon as possible. It's about knowing that if effort is invested, it will not be a waste of time. Effort will be rewarded. So the primary endgame system of Path of Exile is running maps. And you can enhance or juice those maps by adding modifiers to them that make them more challenging and more rewarding. You do this by investing resources into juicing a map. And generally your investment pays off. Or at least it does after running multiple juiced maps. With the changes, players are estimating a 95 to 98% reduction in all loot dropped in endgame juiced maps, meaning it's basically no longer worth investing into juicing a map. As an example, some top players ran the most juiced map they possibly could, invested the maximum amount realistically possible in the most optimized way possible, and they made less than a 20% profit. Now you may think, well, hey, that's still 20% profit. Sure, but again, this is in the absolute top end of play, best case scenario. And remember, juicing increases the difficulty. The more you juice a map, the more difficult it becomes. So what's the point in making a map significantly more difficult for just a few percent more of profit? Now, it should be noted that the people feeling this the most are the top players. An average player won't see the same degree in reduction of loot or profit, but they are still affected. Some people estimate that the average player would feel anywhere between a 50% and an 80% reduction in drops. So as a result of all this, player retention numbers this league have been some of the lowest in the game's history, with about half of the players already gone a week into the league. But more so than that, the community just seems so upset, more so than I've ever seen it in all of the game's history. And it seems the thing that upset players the most was not necessarily that there were these nerfs to the drop rates. Of course they don't like that, but I don't think that's what got them so upset. It's that the developers, who are normally super communicative, who release thousands of words of detailed patch notes and dev manifestos explaining all the balance changes and the philosophies behind it, did not sufficiently warn players about these nerfs before the league started. Given how some players feel this is the biggest change to the game in recent years, they felt it warranted more than a quick comment that really did not encompass in any way the magnitude or scale of what was being done. Now, the situation developed over the course of the week with multiple comments from the devs, multiple attempts at communication, and in the first response, the devs acknowledged that changes had in fact been made to loot drops, because at first players were wondering, like, what's going on? Is there some bug? Is there some problem? Clearly we're not getting nearly as much drops as we used to get. So the devs acknowledged the changes that were made, and the first change was that the rate of encountering rare monsters from certain league content had been reduced. So you were fighting, killing, and receiving rewards from fewer rare monsters than in the past. The second thing they did was remove a massive bonus that they used to give to item quantity and or rarity that applied to some league-specific monsters, and they replaced it with a moderate increase to item quantity, roughly a doubling or tripling of quantity. Now, the reasoning behind these nerfs is founded in solid logic. Too many things drop in Path of Exile. The game is unplayable without a loot filter. The devs want fewer things to drop, but on average have the things that do drop be better. And so the initial reaction from the community to this response was, first off, surprise that the drop nerfs was not some kind of bug, but was actually intended design. And then they were understandably upset that such a significant change that massively impacted the experience of playing the game and interacting with all of its subsystems was not documented before the start of the league. Then in a subsequent message to the community, the devs stated they were going to deploy a patch that would significantly improve item drops. But this again was not very well received by the community because they saw it as, okay, well, first you gave us a 90% nerf, now you're giving us a 33% buff, so it's still a net significant nerf. Then in a third message, the devs stated that they would tune down the difficulty of rare monsters. This was met with a positive response by the community. This would skew the reward per time invested into defeating a rare monster more in favor of players, i.e. it's now worth taking the time to kill those rare monsters to get the drops. Then in a fourth message, the devs admitted that they did not properly communicate the loot changes before expansion release. And the big guy, Chris Wilson himself, humbly admitted that he himself didn't fully understand the impact that these changes would have when his team communicated them to him. If he had, he says he would have better communicated the change ahead of launch, and he takes full responsibility for the mistake. He also said that there wasn't enough time to playtest the change properly for how it would feel for players. Basically, sometimes something looks good on paper or in a spreadsheet, but it's not always about that. It's not always about just the numbers. You also have to consider how a change feels for people who have been playing your game for a long time. For someone playing Path of Exile for their first time this league, there's nothing wrong. The game's great. You have nothing to compare it to. You don't know that drops are lower. It feels fine. But if you've been accustomed to years of playing the game a certain way, and suddenly that way of enjoying the game is massively nerfed without warning, it understandably feels bad. Once you've given players something, it is incredibly difficult to take it away without causing a negative experience for the players. Whenever you nerf overpowered things, some players will always be upset, but overall, in general, the player base tends to accept that it is necessary for the betterment of the game as a whole. But when you make massive, sweeping changes that negatively impact the vast majority of players, and you do so without warning or explanation of why they should swallow this pill, yeah, it's not gonna go well. So players overall seem unhappy that the devs are not reverting the changes, but rather seem to be committed to this direction. As part of the buffs that the devs delivered over the course of the week is something that amounts to a lottery. To put it very simply, you have a chance at finding a monster that will drop a ton of loot, and that's supposed to make up for the loot you aren't getting normally. Basically, averaged out, that should make up for it. But remember, this is a community that is attempting to go towards more determinism rather than more randomness. They would rather get that loot spread out evenly than wait on the hopes of winning the lottery, something that's totally out of their control. Now, the most concerning thing for some players is that all these changes over the past few leagues that have been deemed unpopular by some segment of the player base, the changes that slow the game down, make it more challenging, these all seem to be paving the way for Path of Exile 2. That this is the vision the devs have for the game, and that they seem committed to this vision, even though this isn't the game that the players have fallen in love with. It's raising the question as to whether the devs are out of touch with the player base, with what they want, or whether they simply believe that players will learn to love this new vision. Path of Exile's recent Steam reviews have gone from very positive down to mostly negative. Of course, this is review bombing, but it demonstrates how upset the community has become. This is quite possibly the most upset they've ever been, and it feels like things have just reached a boiling point over the past few leagues. Now, it's entirely possible that the devs' vision of Path of Exile is exactly what the game needs to explode in popularity. At present, Path of Exile has plateaued at around 250,000 concurrent players at the start of the league. If it wants to grow in a big way, if it wants to be hitting 1 million concurrents one day, is it possible that this vision that the devs have is the path towards reaching that wider audience? It certainly might be, but it does raise the question, if this will let Path of Exile reach 1 million concurrents, but this is not what the current players want, is it okay to shed the current player base to make room for new players who embrace this vision? Path of Exile 1 will cease to exist as these veteran players have known it, as it has progressively changed into Path of Exile 2. PoE 2 is not just an entirely new game, and PoE 1 will still be there as it has existed in the past. So you can't even tell those veterans, oh, well, if you don't like PoE 2, just go back and play PoE 1. As a dev, it's never an easy decision to do something you know will be unpopular. Giving players exactly what they want, that's easy. Knowing when not to is difficult. Given how much things have boiled over, it feels like we've reached an impasse. Either the devs need to compromise on their vision and make concessions to keep the current player base happy, or be willing to shed some of its player base in the hopes that remaining committed to the vision ultimately pays off. But I turn the question to you folks. If you play PoE, what are your thoughts on all this, on everything that has happened over the past week? Sound off in the comments. In other news, we got some new crumbs of information about Blizzard's upcoming survival game, which was first revealed in January. According to Jez Corden of Windows Central, speaking on the Xbox 2 podcast with Randall Thor19, the game's internal codename is Odyssey. Don't expect that to be the title, however. Every Blizzard game is given a codename to avoid leaks. For example, Diablo 4's codename is Fenris. Connected journalist Jason Schreier confirmed that the codename Odyssey is accurate. Corden said that Odyssey looks somewhat like upcoming adventure game Everwild, with fairy tale aesthetic visuals similar to Fable Legends, and steampunk or alchemical machines. The game will allegedly have base building and crafting, which is to be expected from the genre, but also players can open up shops and do things like craft potions and sell them to other players through the shops. Corden believes, however, that the game will not be an MMO, but more like Ark Survival Evolved, and it'll be first person and include combat with bow and arrow as well as magic. What Blizzard has historically done well is take an established formula and make a game in that genre that has more polish and quality than you've ever seen before. That's basically how Blizzard built up its reputation, and the most recent time it did this was with Overwatch in 2016. Blizzard had never released a shooter before. Overwatch wasn't exactly groundbreaking new stuff. They took stuff that existed, they did it really well, and it was a huge hit when it first released. So if Blizzard is taking the ideas of Valheim and Fallout 76 and Ark and all these kinds of games, puts a AAA budget or a quadruple A budget behind it, and bangs out another Overwatch, this could end up being the biggest survival game release ever. In some quick Diablo 4 news, we have an update from the alleged leaked document that suggested that Diablo 4's pre-purchase would be revealed on December 8th at the Game Awards. If you haven't seen the full details, do check out this video here. But the update is that this week, the Game Awards have been revealed to be taking place on December 8th, which lends a great amount of credibility to the leak. While the date could have been guessed based on last year's Game Awards, it would be a weird hoax to release shortly before the expected official Game Awards release date would be revealed. In some exciting Diablo 2 news, a new feature has hit the test server, Terror Zones. You can choose to opt into enabling this feature, and if you do, every hour, monsters in a specific zone of the game will be boosted in level and thus grant more XP and loot. And better loot if you know how the loot system works in D2. Once you enter a game with terror zones enabled, you'll be informed of what the current terror zone is. When the hour is almost up, you'll be informed that a new terror zone is coming up. So the objective here is to break up the stale farming meta of just doing the same runs over and over. Now, you'll have the option of farming in terror zones. This represents the most significant change in the meta of Diablo 2, unmodded Diablo 2, in 10 years, more even. This is a highly experimental feature, which is why it's on the test server, and Blizzard is open to making changes. Initial community reactions do seem positive so far. For the time being, terror zones are a multiplayer-only feature, but the possibility for them coming to single-player does exist. In some quick Diablo 3 news, Season 27 launched last night. Leading up to this season, this week the European server got a really terrible challenge rift, whereas the American server got a very easy one. So the devs actually changed out the European challenge rift so that Euro players would not be off to a rough start when the season began, since completing the challenge rift gives such an immense early game boost. Apart from that, the season is off to a great start, Hammer of the Ancient Barbs are already crushing it. We got a video guide on Hoda Barbs over here. Crusader Angels don't currently seem overpowered, nor does the Witch Doctor Bogadile. If you watched our tier list video on the best builds, those were two wild cards that could have dominated the season, but so far, we're not seeing any upsets to the tier list. Shadow Impale Demon Hunters, using the new Strafe, are doing amazingly. Shadow Impale typically performs extremely well early season, then falls off later on. You can rest assured that it will be surpassed by Marauder Demon Hunters eventually. As expected, Legacy of Dreams, Wave of Light Monks are dominating. We got a build guide on that build over here. Trigul Necromancers and Talrasha Wizards are high up there as well. Helltooth Witch Doctors are topping the Witch Doctor charts for the first time in years, though I suspect Mundunugu will surpass them quite soon, since Helltooth was the starter set. If you haven't yet picked a build for Season 27, check out the tier list video here. And if you have picked a build, sound off in the comments with what you're playing this season, because that is going to wrap up this week's video. But do be sure to have checked out our video coverage of the Diablo 4 monetization update. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can consider pledging on YouTube or Patreon and unlocking behind-the-scenes content, monthly virtual hangouts, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. Check out these other videos and subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders for more gaming content.